Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price, and this is another episode of Faction Factory, where we play the role of a faction designer. It has been a while since there was a Faction Factory episode, so for those who are new, it's important to understand why I do this. First, it's fun to explore the design space of a game, even if the factions stay custom forever and don't go anywhere. Half the fun of playing a variable player powers game is determining what other powers could be. Second, these videos can be an inspiration to others. Maybe someone else sees it, and it gives them an idea, and they create something awesome for their group. We have a great group of passionate, creative viewers. Finally, when I suggest changes to cards during playtesting, I'll often look to my custom sets for ideas that we could explore further. Even if the end result doesn't resemble my idea, it often serves as a conversation starter, and that's perfectly okay. The reason why this video is airing today is because I did exactly that with the Grims. In case you haven't heard the story before, I'll keep it short. Back when Cease and Desist was first announced, long before I even thought about podcasting, I thought about what other IPs I would parody. And it occurred to me that two of my favorite games were Smash related, and it was perfectly Smash Up to combine them together. Smash Up and Super Smash Bros. So I created a Super Smash Bros. Expansion with some help from my friends, and I often marvel at some of the concepts that ended up appearing in the game in later expansions. Turing Jedi and I still joke that there seems to be a secret camera in my office. Anyway, the Smash Bros. Game at the time was the Wii U version, the one edition I didn't have because the Wii U was disappointing and I wasn't going to buy its successor. But I really enjoyed the Honest trailer for it, where they point out that the latest one showcases the bottom of the barrel. Specifically, they mention that if you knew who Shulk was before Smash, you were Japanese. For the record, I did, and I actually love Xenoblade Chronicles, and you should too. So I decided I wanted to make a faction based on these no-name characters, and it turns out that there were concepts in the game that were begging to be explored. Most of this faction is unchanged from its original form, though I did modernize a few things because of rule changes and to make wording consistent. Cease and Desist was only barely announced, and obviously factions that were conceived after were not a consideration back in 2016. But it's interesting to see the parallels with the Grimm, and why I felt like they should go in a particular direction, as well as newer factions that can work with the Nobodies. I often start by looking at underutilized cards, in this case Blossom. You can play 3 minions with the same name, but this is terrible for the killer plants and hard to maximize. As many of you know, I love Innsmouth, but they really hurt for pairings. So I wanted to make a faction that could take the idea of minion names and really run with it, and I felt that this theme was the perfect match for the Nobodies, the characters who are so unknown that their names go unrecognized and are interchangeable, so their minion theme is that names are important. Because these characters are important, and together they combine to form some very powerful abilities. Though I didn't have the Wii U version, I still loved Brawl, and my absolute favorite character in that edition was Mr. Game & Watch. He was much improved from Melee, even though I liked him then, and it saddens me that they made him worse in Ultimate. Steven, I know that upsets you, and I'm sorry, but they made him worse. Because he was my favorite, I wanted him to be the focal point of the faction, and it was convenient that Mr. Game & Watch can shapeshift and take many forms. So I built the entire faction around Dr. Console, who has the names of all minions that you own. Because this is a special ability, it applies at all times, in your hand, deck, discard pile, and play, and this is crucial. This was the first card I made for the faction, and every other card was conceived with this specific minion in mind. I wanted it to have all the advantages and disadvantages of its ability, such as being restricted by the VATs. There's a particular type of card I've always wanted to see, and I don't know if Smash Up will ever do this, but the game implies that there is a 1-to-1 ratio between name and ability. But why? Why not have a card with the same name, but different abilities? In the Wii U version, they introduced the Mii Fighter, who had 3 forms. This seemed perfect for what I wanted to do. 3 minions with the same name, but differing in their ability. And I wanted them to be an engine that fires when they are co-located. So I debated between 2 and 3, and determined that 2 was too easy with Dr. Console, so I changed it to 3. You have an engine that requires 3 minions, but you could customize your engine, just like you could apparently customize those fighters. It turns out I really liked the Mii Brawler in Smash Ultimate, and now I like this idea even more. So each faceless athlete has the same trigger. 3 faceless athletes on the same base, but a different payoff. First is drawing a card, which is simple and isn't objectively better or easier than any other comparable ability. Second is placing a power counter, which is like a very delayed, repeatable lab assistant or an air doctor that requires serious commitment. Finally, since I prefer it when I can break up and persist my engine, a movement card to shuffle minions to or from the base, like a Zeppelin. Even with Dr. Console, it would take a considerable amount of time and resources for these engines to fire, and using Dr. Console actually weakened the engine, but I liked the approach a lot. For the next 2, these were ones I had to tweak over the years. This was just before the ignobles had been introduced, and I originally had antagonistic elements where you could change someone's name and then take control of them. And I deemed that too powerful and redundant with the ignobles, so they were changed to reflect more of a self-serving, positive approach. As a programmer, I know that redundancy is important, so I wanted that reflected in Bobby, who gets +2 power if another Bobby is on the same base. For Luke, I think about his psychic shield and his crazy hit priority. Seriously, he is my personal nemesis in Brawl, and he always seems to cancel out my moves because he hits me first, so I wanted him to be defensive. And while he seems objectively better than the Warbot, the entire minion scale of robots is out of alignment, so I think that's okay. And I like the subtlety of the ability. Luke cannot be destroyed. This means that any other minion named Luke could also not be destroyed, but this wasn't more powerful than General Ivan and took effort to apply to many minions. Finally, there was Shulk, who I named Chuck. It was going to be Chuck or Sean, and I preferred Chuck for some reason. If you've ever played Xenoblade Chronicles, Shulk's enchant is a key move in the game, as it requires a charge and grants a power to your whole party. I wanted Chuck to reflect that, and historically, this was the 3rd faction in the expansion. The first faction was built around the idea of using counters as a form of power trigger, like the monster, which is heavily underutilized. And I thought this is very reminiscent of Xenoblade, where you had to use your charge to activate Monado abilities, so Chuck can remove a power counter to place a power counter on up to 3 other minions with the same name. He cannot place one on himself to make this indefinite, and there isn't an easy way to get power counters for this faction. Why 3? You have 3 party members in Xenoblade, but again, Chuck cannot place it on himself. And because it requires a power counter to remove, it doesn't necessarily occur every turn without good synergy. And I love synergy, and I was excited about the combination potential. For the actions, I gave them an acting sub-theme because I envisioned the faction as the chorus in a large play, lost and unnoticed in the crowd. For these images, ignore the fact that there is no unique artwork. It was way too hard to find. I always design the double features first, and it was obvious right away what I wanted them to be. One of them had to be an action that overwrites a name, but that wasn't enough of a benefit. There are multiple actions that grant +1 power and some other benefit, and this is the perfect type of faction-specific benefit to meet that criteria. So Understudy grants +1 power and allows you to take the name of a minion in play. This is important for abilities that affects all minions of the same name, and helps with the faceless athletes as well. I also wanted a card that functioned like spreading the word, but couldn't be objectively better. This is hard because spreading the word lets you play 2 minions, and this is the only double feature that did so. It already matched on the same name, but had to match on a minion in play as well. By capping it at power 3, Duet wouldn't be objectively better, although it's hard for spreading the word to match a 4 and play 2 4s. I also wanted to put the emphasis on the pair, so the wording was chosen carefully. You had to play 2, and they had to be on the same base. I didn't want this to be a blossom that is used like an Instagrow. Because the name of the minions seemed to be interchangeable, I liked the idea of the minions themselves being interchangeable, so that Dr. Console could take a bullet for someone else, as a generic substitute. Stunt Double allows you to intercept a destruction and apply it to a different minion with the same name. This could be Dr. Console, but it also has applications when a minion has actions or power counters on it. These types of cards are situational, but sometimes unique cards need to be. Because Dr. Console's ability applies at all times, I wanted cards that emphasized that. One of my favorite cards in Dominion was Wishing Well, which requires you to know your deck and play the odds or order things appropriately. I thought that worked well for naming your own cards, especially since Dr. Console would automatically be drawn. It wasn't guaranteed to do anything, but had fairly good upside. This covered the deck, but what about the discard pile? Encore lets you shuffle up to 3 cards with the same name into your deck. This could be a double feature action, or a particularly prominent minion, and Dr. Console could also go along for the ride, which was important since he is the core of the faction. Chuck needs power counters, so I wanted an action that could supply them. Star Billing can place power counters on up to 2 minions with the same name, which is in line with comparable actions, but restrictive in who could receive them, unlike Gimme the Prize, which can do an E3. You can use it on Chuck and Dr. Console, or play Understudy on Chuck to make it easier for this action to be effective. We have the concept of printed power, so why not have a printed name? Audition is a play-on-base action that allows you to draw a card if the printed name of a card matches the printed name of a minion here. By looking at printed name, Dr. Console can only match its own name and wouldn't work as the source minion or card drawn otherwise. This is necessary to prevent the faction from having 2 cards that can give a guaranteed draw every turn, while highlighting the original focus on minion names. So this faction respects their heritage and doesn't always break the rule. For the final card, I often like to have a utility card, and movement is a good option. Chorus lets you move one of your minions to a base with a minion with the same name. Nothing earth-shattering, again just a utility card, one that allows any minion to move to Dr. Console. When I look at this faction today, I'm really excited about the pairings that exist, particularly for Dr. Console. He can buff up War Raptors without having the War Raptor ability. He can be a microbot that the Reclaimer can reshuffle because his ability works in the discard pile. He can be a terminal groupie play. Return to the Sea can pull Dr. Console along with any other minions, like a jumper. Teleport Overflow would love Dr. Console. There's just so much flexibility in this style of card. It would create synergy with many factions that often struggle for partners, and I think that is a good way to approach design space. Focus on what is often overlooked, just like this cast of characters. The Faceless Athletes provide good utility abilities that everyone can use. They're just harder to orchestrate. I like Chuck as a power counter engine that can work to create many counters per turn, but takes time to set up. Maybe it's my love of Innsmouth, but I feel like the idea of minion naming, even with the Grimm, is still unexplored. I think there is room in the game for both, especially since this is an underutilized concept, and the 2 factions that use this concept don't actually work together at all. I'm hoping to record some matches with the Nobodies over the summer so players can see them in action, and even try them out. What do you think of this faction and their core concept? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.